Setting up auto leveling for your Anet printer is probably one of the best upgrades you can do for it, but it's also one of the most confusing at times. Now, for this printer that I have here, I already have auto leveling set up, but unfortunately I have a slight problem. So this bracket that I had printed off of Thingiverse, let me focus that there, I had printed this, and the bracket doesn't actually line up with the original. This is the bracket right here. So the fan is shifted slightly to the right, causing any type of nozzle that you 3D print from Thingiverse to run into the heat block and melt it. And that's the last thing that you want. So I'm going to reset up the auto leveling system entirely. So I'm going to run step by step on how to set this up all from the top. And this time I'm going to use this bracket, which is a front sensor holder. This one is lined up with the original bracket. So I want to add this one to this printer and we'll see how it goes. So the first thing you'll want to do is take off the old bracket. Now that should be pretty easy for you if you've assembled this printer on your own. All you have to do is take off these two screws down here, but make sure you take off the fan first, which is this screw here and this screw here. Then take off the two on the bottom. Now, of course, that's not the original bracket that came with it. This is. So you'll be taking this off instead. I just took this part off because this is what I had set up originally for my auto level. So there's a couple things you're going to need. You're going to need the bracket for the sensor. Now, there's a lot of different options on Thingiverse that you can pick from, but in my opinion, this one is the best one because it keeps the same alignment of the screw holes for the fan as the original bracket, so the fan won't be shifted left or right. It'll be in the exact same spot that it's supposed to be. Another thing you're going to need is a JST kit. Now, you don't need all of these, so if you could find one where it's a little bit smaller with less, that's fine too. But this one for $9, you get quite a bit. You need the header pins, and you also need just one connector. Now, one thing that you can do is you can take the connector off of the Z end stop switch that you have for your printer now. You can cut that off and you can install that onto your sensor, but you'll still need these metal pins to do that. Also, you have the tool here, which will make your life a lot easier, but it is rather expensive. There are tutorials online on how to crimp down the pins onto wires with pliers, which is what I did, but if you don't want to do it that way and you want to make your life a lot easier, get this tool. Now, the way auto level works might be a little bit different from what you might expect. The way that it works is you have this sensor here, and this sensor, as you saw, was attached to the extruder unit here. What this does is when it goes down, and if you look on top here, you'll see this little bulb. That's an LED. So what will happen is it'll probe each point on the bed. So when it goes down like this, and if you keep your eye on the top, it'll flash. That detects when it's at a certain distance from the bed. Now, that distance is fixed depending on what sensor you have, but with your settings that you're going to have to set up in Marlin, that'll be how you adjust your height level of where your nozzle is on your bed. So now it's time to install the bracket onto your 3D printer. Now, as you can see, I was only able to use one screw because I ended up losing the other one, but it's okay because for the most part it's pretty secure with only one. If you noticed, I kind of had to push in the bracket a little bit to keep it aligned to get inside of the screw hole, It's a bit tricky, but once you get it, it'll stay in place pretty well. So once you get the bracket on, just put the fan back on, and then we can get on to the next step. To install the sensor, what we need to do is take off the Z end stop switch if you haven't done so already. That's the switch down here. So take that off because the sensor is going to be replacing it. So I'm going to take the cable of my sensor and I'm going to route it through the top of my printer just to be sure that it doesn't get in the way when I'm printing. Make sure to route it to where it can move okay while the extruder head is moving around during the print, but it won't get in the way of anything. Okay, once you've done that, now we need to move to the back. As you can see, my cable management isn't the best. I'm planning on fixing that sooner rather than later, but for now this will work. So take your connector and you're going to plug that in to the Z end stop port on your motherboard of your printer. Make sure to give it a tug so that it's secure and to make sure that it doesn't come out. Okay, now that we have that set up, we can reassemble everything and then we can get to the software portion of this setup. So now we've come to the software portion of this tutorial. I'm going to be using the Marlin configuration tool. When I did my tutorial on how to set up Marlin, I used this tool. I'll link that video in the description, but I'll also link this tool down there, so if you don't have it, you can download it. The first thing we want to do is let's go down to the calibrate section of this tool. Okay, so here in the calibrate, we need to enable bed leveling. I have mine set up for bilinear. I have found that bilinear, in my opinion, does the best job. It's up to you on what you want to turn on. They all do different methods of auto bed leveling. You can experiment, you can test, it's up to you, but I find bilinear to work the best for my printer. So we're going to enable that one, and then down here are the probe bed positions. We will come back to this later, but basically what this means is when it goes to probe each point of the bed, when you run the auto leveling command, this is how far left it will go on the bed, this is how far right it will go, this is how far front and how far back. The reason why you need to adjust these is because when you get the offsets of where your probe is located on the nozzle, you'll need to adjust these so that it doesn't go off the bed, and also so it goes far enough to where it levels properly. Now that you've seen where all this is located, we're going to go back up to the probe section. You need to enable this, which is the Z-min probe uses the Z-min end stop pin. What we did earlier is we plugged in the probe to the Z-min end stop port. So yes, we need to enable that. Now this is a fixed mounted probe, which means that it doesn't deploy and it doesn't move, it's fixed. So you need to make sure that's enabled as well. Down here, this is probably going to be the most complicated part of this section, is the X and Y probe offset from extruder. So real quick before we get to that, make sure the Z clearance between probes, I would say put that to 3. What this will do is every time it probes a point on the bed, it'll raise the probe up to 3. That'll give it enough clearance to where it has enough room to move down and catch where the leveling is on the bed. You'll understand a little bit more when you see how the leveling command works, but basically all this does is it raises it up by 3 millimeters once it probes a point. So now we've come to the trickiest portion of this, which is the X and Y probe offset from extruder. The X and Y values here, what they do is they tell the printer's software where the probe is located in reference to the nozzle. For example, X probe offset from extruder, right now it says 0. So right now it thinks from left to right the probe is exactly the same as where the nozzle is. The Y, I have it set to -53, which means that it thinks that it's 53 millimeters in front of the nozzle. So what it will do is it'll account for that when you auto home the bed. because what it will do is it'll put the probe in the center rather than the nozzle itself. So that's the reason why these values need to be set up correctly. It is absolutely crucial that these values are set correctly. Otherwise, your auto bed leveling will not work and the printer will not adjust for where the probe needs to be. So all this work will be pretty much useless unless you get this right. I'm going to show you now how to measure it out so you can get it correct. So this is the bottom side of my extruding unit. What we need to do is we need to measure the distance between the center of the nozzle and the center of the auto leveling probe. So what I need to do is, I could take measuring tape, but what I decided to do instead is use a caliper. So what I tried doing is putting the caliper end as close to the center of the nozzle as possible, and then just expanding it outward until it got as close to the center of the probe as possible. So I got roughly about 55 millimeters in front of the nozzle. That's going to be our Y offset. So measuring the X one is a little bit trickier because it's kind of difficult to see how far left or right it is. But for this mount, it's actually not too bad because it's only slightly to the right. So I took a measuring tape and I measured it, and I kind of just did it visually for the most part. But it's only about what seems to be almost just a single centimeter to the right. That is going to be my X offset for this bracket, and I will list them in the description. If you do use this bracket and these values turn out to be successful, then you can use these same ones and you won't have to go through this entire measuring process. Alright, so now that we're back in the software, we can input our values. So for the Y probe offset from extruder, because it's in front of the nozzle, it needs to be a negative value. If you hover your mouse over this text box, it'll say that it needs to be negative for front, positive for behind. So I got 55, so I'm going to put that to 55. And then for the X, it needs to be, I believe, positive for right. Yes. So it's right 1 millimeter from the extruder. So I'm going to put that as the value. So now that we got our offsets, we're going to go up here and make sure a couple things are disabled. Make sure you got all these values set up the same as mine. Zoom in, probe, and stop inverting, make sure that's true. Go up here and stop pull-ups, make sure that's off. Everything else seems to be pretty much good to go. Oh, one more thing I forgot to mention is that you want to make sure you have Z-Safe homing enabled. What this does is when you go to home all, it'll put the nozzle above the bed. So because you don't have a switch anymore and now you have a sensor, it needs to always be above the bed. Otherwise it'll just crash down into it. Just do your normal check of everything else, make sure everything is in order, and then you can get ready to flash. Well, it took a lot of work, but we finally made it. All that's left now is to test to see if the home all works and to see if we can auto level a bed. Beautiful. So it's pretty close to the center of the bed already. I did go back and change a few of the values around just to get the auto level to work a little bit better. But what I ended up doing is testing out the auto level, which I'm running a G29 command right now, and it's pretty far to the left here, and I got it to go pretty much to the edge on the left and on the edge on the right. So I'll put those values in the description. In fact, I may just link my entire configuration file in the description for you. So all you have to do is import that into the tool, or just look at the values on whatever program you're using, and you can set it up on your own. So thank you all so much for watching. My plan is to do another video on how to set up Z offset and getting a perfect first layer, but hopefully this one was really helpful for you, and if you have any questions, please leave them in the description and I'll do my best to answer them for you. Thank you so much for watching.